Hi everyone, just before we start this week's Hedge Hopping sortie, little shout out to say that we are on Patreon. If you head to patreon.com/historyhack, you can see all the amazing tiers which start from just £3 a month. We know you all do so much for supporting us and we are ever so grateful for that. But if you're able to give us a bit of help through Patreon, we can keep this podcast going from strength to strength. We all thank you for your continued support, and without further ado, here's Hedge Hopping. Hello and welcome to History Hacks, dedicated Second World War air power podcast, Hedge Hopping, with me, Matt Bone. When we think of Bomber Command today, our minds usually go to the young men in Lancasters in the dark over Germany, bouncing bombs and night fighters. Well, that view is correct. The journey to get there was a fraught one, and the years of Bomber Command at the beginning of the war saw it fighting a very different sort of campaign. For today's Hedge Hopping sortie, we are delighted to be hosted at the Michael Beetham Conservation Centre at RAF Cosford, where we're going to be looking at two of Bomber Command's early aircraft, which are currently under restoration by the RAF Museum. We're going to be looking at the Handley-Page Hampden and the incredible Vickers Wellington. Our host today, we're delighted to say, is Darren Priday, who is the manager of the Michael Beetham Conservation Centre. And hello, Darren, how have you been?
Very well, thank you. Yeah.
I guess we have to ask this. How's lockdown been for you and the chaps and ladies here?
Well, to be honest with you, we've been carrying on working, not as a full team throughout lockdown. We have our obligations to the National Collection, which is what we look after. It's not a private collection owned by the museum. We're on the same sort of level as the Science Museum, Natural History Museum, all them. So these objects belong to the nation. So we had an obligation to look after them. But and that's simple little things like making sure tyre pressures are up. If you leave it for 4 months during a lockdown, you suddenly come back, find they're all on their rims. You've done a lot of damage. So coming to that, but also our legal requirements for things like firearms, radiation, all this sort of stuff. We're coming in still doing the checks on them during lockdown.
So I guess one question to ask is, who was Michael Beetham?
Well, Michael Beetham was a Second World War Lancaster pilot and then had a very long and distinguished career and become Chief of Air Staff. And unlike most Chief of Air Staff, he actually did get to do the very top rank, Marshal of the Royal Air Force, whereas some of them fall one short. Things he brought the Tornado into RAF service, and one thing that all services nowadays require is reserve forces, and it was his idea to get the RAF reserve forces built up. And also he was involved with the bombing of Port Stanley during the Falklands War. It was his idea to send a Vulcan all the way down there, and I think most people probably ended up on the floor laughing. Impossible as we know, Black Buck, and that was a success. So and the building here was purposely built and opened by him in 2002.
Yes, and it's a beautiful facility, and we've been very fortunate to have a mooch around, which we will come back to in a moment. And I guess as we're sat here looking around, how many projects do you guys have on the go at any one time?
Well, you've mentioned the Hampden and Wellington. We've got a Lysander in here. We've got the Dornier. We've got an LVGC6, which we haven't seen yet, which is just around the back. Got a range safety launch as well, so we don't just do aeroplanes. We can do anything. What else we got in here? There's a few engines lying around which, if they're going potentially up for going out on loan or coming back from an external loan where we've loaned some of our objects, we bring them back here and do the condition reports. So a few other bits and pieces sat around like that. But a lot of history in here.
We might come back to the Dornier later because we're very lucky to have a little look around at that. I keep saying we because for this I've brought a friend. Now, dragging him out of the Merry Rose, which is our virtual pub, normally Chris Sams is a boaty sort of chap, but he's actually also written a book about early Bomber Command. Its title is Flying into the Storm, RAF Bombers at War 1939 to 1942. And as we're talking about early Bomber Command, he was the perfect person to bring along with me on the road trip. Chris, how have you been?
Yeah, great. I'm really quite excited.
There's going to be pictures of him with his head in various aircraft looking like a child. Well, he looks like a child most of the time, but there we go. So what are your first impressions of the two aircraft we're going to be chatting about?
With the Hampden, I mean, you just when you read about how cramped they were and what the crew's experience were, it's not until you're poking your head inside and think, actually, you really can't move around in here. It is really quite cramped. And the Wellington, again, it's just the geodesic design is just fantastic. It's just more beautiful than I could imagine, really.
It really is. It's breathtakingly beautiful design. But we're going to come to that in a moment, because we're going to start with the Hampden, because it is a very, very rare beast. And we're saying it's not particularly wide. Darren told me it was 36 inches across, which is the same size as my jeans. So that's a bit of a worry. But interestingly, at Handley-Page, she had a German designer, didn't she?
Yeah, that's Gustav Lachmann. Interesting story. He was an early aviator, but when he went through his college and university, he was trying to design leading edge, what we call slats nowadays. And Handley-Page at that time were looking at that itself and heard about him, and went across to Germany and met him. I think there was a few years past, and then he came over and started working in the UK for Handley-Page. Of course, then war kicks, the design of the Hampden, war kicks off. We have a German working for a British aircraft manufacturer. Didn't go down too well with MI5, is it? MI6, whichever deals with the interior. And they locked him up, sent him off to Canada. Then under protest from Handley-Page, he did come back to the Isle of Man in UK, but was still imprisoned and turned prison, and was working for Handley-Page. And once the war was over, he came out and he worked the rest of his career as a Handley-Page employee and became a British citizen. And we were trying to work out the year. It was late 50s, I think, but he's soon become a British citizen.
It's an interesting design, because we were chatting earlier, and it's the same specification as the Wellington, very different output to it. But I guess as we're here, do you just want to describe her? Granted, she does have her wings on, but do you want to just describe her to the listener who may not be familiar with the aircraft?
Yeah, so she's a conventional aeroplane that your Boeings and Airbus design. So it's got your frames, your longerons, spars, ribs, all these sort of things, all the buzzwords that you would hear normally. Very, very narrow, as we mentioned, 36 inches for anybody that's metric. That's about 93 centimetres. She was actually designed as a fighter bomber, because when you think about it, it was B932 was the Air Ministry specification. In those days, it's probably right to think that if you were designing a new modern aeroplane, she would be better than the fighters of the day. But obviously at that time, Messerschmitt, Hawker and the Supermarine were suddenly developing these super fighters that were out in the Second World War. So the fighter element of a Hampden never really happened. Very, very long, very, very narrow, flying suitcase, flying tadpole, various names like that. The Germans used to call her the barn door. I think we can understand why, a nice broad side to her. Yes, so very nice. Four sections: forward fuselage, rear fuselage, tail boom, and then the tail group. Tail group consisting of twin fin, twin rudder. Again, because it was an early aeroplane, we're talking fabric-covered flying controls. Our example here on the elevator and the rudder, you can go and see all the fabric covering. But this one was shot down. That's the interesting story on this one.
Before we get to that bit, let's just run through the vital statistics. So she's got 2 radial engines.
Yep, Bristol Pegasus 18s, just short of 1,000 bhp each.
What bomb load could she carry?
1.8 tons.
And defensive armament, we were chatting about this earlier, was increased, but basically it was...
Initially, fixed forward firing Browning, I think it would have been for the pilot. Because there were 4 crews, so the pilot had a gun, fixed forward firing. The navigator bomb aimer had a machine gun, that would have been Vickers. Then the wireless operator and the rear gunner would have also had their own guns. Yeah, we spoke a little bit about it. The initial design for the upper gunner, so that would have been your wireless operator's position, he had a single gun, and if you could see any videos or footage of the early Hampdens, you might just see on the starboard side, just after the upper cupola, a little dark line, and that's where they used to put the holster. They drop the gun down inside, and the rear cupola then would close down flush. But quite early there was a modification done where they had the 2 distinct cutouts put in for the twin guns. But also as well on the side, the early photos, you may not see what you can see on our one now. There's let's say it's about an A4 piece of paper sort of size, sort of just forward, just behind the pilot's area, and the rear spar just forward where the wireless operator would have been, and that would have been to put a gun for anything attacking wingtip to wingtip. But again, that would have been a single gun, it wasn't fixed, so the crew would have had to grab the gun, thrown it out, put it in, locked it actually into place, otherwise you would shoot yourself up. There was a cam to stop that happening. But then you can imagine, this gun's getting hot through firing, the pilot's throwing the airplane all over the place, you're in all your flying suits, you're hot, you're bothered, you're being shot at, and then you've got to try and take it out, spin it around in this 36 inches. I'm sure the gun will be wider than 36 inches, drop her in the other side for an airplane coming back at you. So very interesting. Again, never really heard of anybody that I've met over the years that have ever been involved in that process, but I dare say there must have been somebody out there who must have had to do it at one time.
So what's the story for this particular aircraft that you guys have here?
Hampdens were on Bomber Command in the early days, obviously on things like Flying Training Command to train the pilots, but then they come out of favour when the big 4-engine bombers come in, but they were still there. And this one ended up on Coastal Command, was converted from a B1 to TB1, T being torpedo, and then there were 32 Hampdens set up to fly on an operation called Operation Orator, and this was to protect the Arctic convoys. There's a very good programme on the telly about, if you like, Jeremy Clarkson. It was him that hosting it. It's Arctic convoys, and it's about route PQ17. These are going from the sort of Scottish Lochs area out up around Iceland, up towards Greenland, and then sort of as far north as the ice sheet will allow, and then dropping into a port in northern Russia called Archangel. And on that route, again, if you watch the programme, it will all become quite clear, we lost a hell of a lot of ships. I think it was something like 28 out of 42. So it was something like 66.
Most of the convoy, wasn't it?
Yeah, a lot of convoy, and that was because the Navy protection heard that the Tirpitz was coming, and they were sent that way to look at the Tirpitz, and then they were sort of sitting ducks. So the Air Ministry stepped in for the last route in that group of convoys, PQ-18, and sent, say, 32 Hampdens out to northern Russia, all torpedo carrying, and so they all, September 42, would have left Leuchars in Scotland up to Sumburgh in the Shetland Islands, and that's the last time they were on sort of UK territory, British territory. And then on the night of the 4th, 5th of September, they were all making the hop across towards Murmansk in northern Russia. They were aiming slightly further south than Murmansk, some of the airfields down there. The reason being, not that far from Murmansk, only about 100 kilometres, almost in a straight line, there was a Luftwaffe base at a place called Petsalmo. So 32 took off, 2 squadrons, 144, 455, that was a Royal Australian squadron, 16 from each, and 9 airplanes were lost. Over 25% were lost trying to get them out there. What happened with this one? It suffered some icing problems going across Scandinavia at some point, probably Sweden, neutral Sweden. Shouldn't have been flying that area, but they were. And the navigation, we're talking on quite a lot. And with operational limit of the Hampden, it was probably about an 8-hour op, with the westerly winds that we get this part of the world, throwing them that way as well, hoping to get there. And anyway, it didn't take a lot to be off course, and they were slightly further north, flew directly above Petsalmo. So again, we're talking in Arctic Circle, nothing up there, not millions of air bases or air defences, and just really protecting this airfield, and just wrong place, wrong time. Some ground fire, and there's some shrapnel damage on it, but also they've witnessed 2 Messerschmitt 109s take off, engage, and brought it down. The pilot had been incapacitated, and he was the one that declared the ditch. It wasn't the fact that the aircraft was going to go into a crash landing or anything like that, so it was a sort of controlled crash. Just talk about the crew. There were 5 actually on board, because all 32 aircraft were carrying a technician. We're taking it out to Russia. Nobody knows nobody knows what a Hampden looked like, or how to put fuel, bomb loads, and all the usual maintenance stuff required. So all 32, say, were carrying technicians. Robertson, he was our wireless operator, Sergeant Robertson. Sadly, he was very first operation out of training, and he was killed. Daniel Garrity was our wireless operator, most likely a wireless operator as well. He was killed during the air battle. I don't know too much about Daniel Garrity. Robertson, sadly his son passed away just recently, but he was a good friend of mine. We used to keep in contact a lot, and was very involved with our project. So that was 2 out of the 5. Then in the nose section, so really beyond the perspex, greenhouse, front nose, these type of airplanes, there was a Canadian who was Flight Sergeant Gordon Miller. He survived the air battle. He was the one that was guiding our pilot where the Germans were coming in from. But sadly, when the aircraft crash landed, or the controlled landing in the forest area, he was also killed. The good news is, and it gets a little bit better, the pilot did survive. and also the technician on board. That was Corporal George Shepherd. Pilot's name was Perry. He survived, and both ended up. Actually, Perry was left at the aircraft site. He was made to by George Shepherd, the technician, and George did the right thing. Was running west to try and escape the Germans, but he was on the run for about 36 hours, got captured, and then both of them ended up as POWs. Went through the process at Pet Salmo. Both then transferred into Germany. Perry went to 3, George went to 8, and they never met again. Not to our knowledge anyway. We don't think they did. But interestingly, they were both involved in death marches, or long marches, towards the end of the war, and then both repatriated back to Cosford. And George spent 3 months in the hospital here, but Perry also came here as well. So that's why I'm sort of wondering if they ever met. They may have met and not mentioned it to their families. There was a chance. They could have even been in the same ward and not realised, but they were that close to each other. But then I suppose there was always this possibility they may have been here at slightly different times. Perry may not. I'm not sure how long Perry was here for. So yeah, just going back to Robertson, Garrity and Miller, their dead bodies were recovered by the Germans, taken back, and they were given full military honours at the German cemetery at Pet Salmo. Sadly, after the war, Stalin had all the graves bulldozed, so there was no chance of finding their bodies and repatriating them back to the UK, which I know Robertson desperately was trying to do for his father, but that just was never going to happen, sadly. So yeah, that sort of covers that. And then so we got a crashed airplane in the middle wilderness in northern Russia. So how did it come to here in the MBCC? Well, as soon as the Berlin Wall came down, what's that, 1989, that allowed aviation enthusiasts to go out, get permits to go out that area and start looking for these aeroplanes, and that's when this one was found. Quite interestingly, the first number they came across was actually on the tail boom, L6012, and that caused a hell of a stir, because when they looked up the records, that was actually a Hereford. One thing with the Hampden, it was very interchangeable, and that proves it. Yep. Part of the history of this aircraft had a Hanson taxi into the tail boom and needed a replacement. Herefords, there were only 100 manufactured, exactly the same aeroplane, the only difference being a Napier Dagger engine against the Pegasus 18. So yeah, the tail boom was in, but when you actually looked at the tail boom, P1344, our aircraft number, was actually painted on it. But what you have to remember is it was 49 years in the wilderness, and that was fading off because that was done on the squadron, whacked on with the paint. The actual number that would have been put on in the factory, L6012, was underneath. And that was the one that was put on properly, and that was the one that was sort of coming through. Yeah, so yeah, eventually it was found. So then the ownership then was a Canadian, his name Jit Mahal. He got it brought back to the UK. We have a picture over there of the assembled aeroplane. I'll say that in inverted commas, and we're talking about a crashed aeroplane here. But that's when the museum first got to see it, so that would have been sometime in the 90s. And they decided, yes, we don't have a Hampden in our collection, it'd be great to restore the aeroplane at some point, and we swapped it, I believe. Somebody said it was for 2 Spitfires, some say 1 Spitfire, so I believe we swapped it for a Spitfire, which is in those days museum currency. We don't have a lot of Spitfires left for swap anymore, so I think we wouldn't be able to go down that route so often. So yeah, so that's how she ended up in the UK. She was followed the RAF Museum sort of restoration conservation centres around. She was at the Carnarvon air balloon sheds when they were there, and then moved to Whitton while this place was being built, then came here. And again now, so we're talking early 90s, she come back here now, we're sort of 30 years later after her discovery, and she's only just going on display. And the reason behind that, it was always a project, it was always going to be a long-term project. That's extremely long-term, I must admit, but there was never really any priority. Whilst the museum had exhibitions being done elsewhere, the team from here, because we based at Cosford, we work for the RAF Museum, we can easily be working down at Hampden, moving a Spitfire or Lancaster around and whatever, my team, and that's what they've been doing over the years, and various other projects around the UK we've been involved with. The RAF Centenary Tour, we were highly involved in that. So the Hampden was always sort of somebody chip away for a couple of weeks, couple of months, and then left. And one day, one of my technicians, Dave Carr, said to me, do you know what, if you want the Hampden built, he said, leave it to me, I'll build it to you. And that was about 5 years ago. And then from what we had left, he built the forward fuselage. What you can see externally, that the forward fuselage is a replica. Using technical drawings, we've got all the Handley-Page drawings. All the fixtures and fittings inside are of the type would have been used by the Hampden. But he's made all the framework and everything. The rear fuselage is about 95% original. The tail boom, we've got the original tail boom. When we looked at it with all the crash damage on it and all the shrapnel damage, if we were going to take all that out or make it strong enough to be able to be a safe exhibit to put on public display, we reckon we'd have cut half of it away. So in the end, we made the decision, even though we'd started a little bit of work on it, to manufacture a new one. And the idea would being, as you can see how she's displaying now with the tail up high rather than on a tail wheel, we've got area underneath where the museum can consider putting the original tail boom to help to tell the story, with this L6012 quite clearly on there and the red paint on top. And the tail itself is about 30-35% original. So what we had come back, we've incorporated every piece of that into the new build. So that's what we've got now. As for the wings, at the moment we're not making the wings, because just showing you just now that the good thing is with the Hampden, when she goes on public display, what the museum are looking at, because the wing's not there, you don't have the wing box, and that's an area the public can get into. They can see what it's like narrow, this 36-inch dimension, but they can look forward and see the bomb aimer's position, all the instruments. They can look where the pilot would sit. They can look back and see the radios and things like that. So it's a chance, without physically getting inside an airplane, to actually look inside an airplane. So make it an interesting display when she goes down to Hampden. And the last little thing that we've done here, we've put a low wattage 24-volt system into the lighting, so we can switch it on and light her all up inside. So as she would have been, she's a beaut. I don't know.
She's absolutely gorgeous, and once she's on display, that little view that you sort of sticking your head up in the middle is quite something, and eye-opening in just how small it actually is when you think of pilot, flying gear, parachutes, helmets, cables, oxygen mask. It's really small. But one question before we go over to Chris: how many of them are left? Is that it?
There were one. I'm tired from the heat at the moment. I've had a long day. There was either 1,430 manufactured or 1,340. I can't remember which way around it is at the moment. Someone will know out there.
It is warm.
It's one of those two. It's one of those two. Yes. So how many are left? Our one, PLJ no section. This is PLK. It's shot down on the same evening, so it was one of the 9 it was lost. That's up at East Kirkby, as the Brian Nichols project. And the only other one of significant size I'm aware of is in the Canadian Museum over near Vancouver, over the far side, in British Columbia. I'm not being rude, because if you read the website, it needs a lot of restoration work. From 50 yards away, when you're walking towards it, it looks like a Hampden. When you get up, you can see it's been recovered from water. Like the wing shapes there, but there's a lot of wood inside holding it up, so it does need a lot of work. But again, I have visited it. There's not a lot inside that one either. We've got quite a lot of ice populated out inside, which is nice. So what's that? 1 fuselage, 1 nose section, and 1 sort of a Hampden waiting restoration. That's it.
It's been a real treat to be able to get up and have a look at it. So we thank you so much for that. We've been geeking out quite hard so far. But let's talk about what Hampden's got up to, which is the whole reason I brought Chris and not just someone to chat to on the car ride in traffic on the M6. So we're going to talk about 2 types of operations that were given the code names nickel and gardening. I can say that. We're going to start with nickels, because at the start of the war, Bomber Command wasn't actually bombing, was it, Chris?
No, there was a concern that if you bomb a civilian target, the Germans would retaliate. And the French government were very adamant that no one should be launching bombers from French territory to drop anything on German territory in case Paris was destroyed or they retaliated against the French. The British had the Ruhr plan, in which they were going to decimate the industrial heartland. But again, there was this squeamishness that they might hit civilian targets. So the main two main objectives they could carry out was attacking the German Navy, because there are no civilian targets there, or nickel operations of dropping propaganda leaflets across Germany, which they argued was a good way to acclimatise crews for navigation and long distance flying. So if you could drop leaflets, you could drop a bomb, in theory.
So you're going to fly all the way to Germany through potentially flak and fighter defences to drop paper?
Yes, but there wasn't that many in 1939 to early 1940. There weren't that many fighter defences, especially night fighter defences. You get the odd sighting of an aeroplane. We think of the later war, the flak belts and the radar systems. Again, that didn't exist so much, and so it was a lot easier mission. I can't remember off the top of my head what the casualty ratings were, but it wasn't high to enemy action. Usually crash landings or engine faults.
How effective were the leaflets?
Germany continued to fight the war, so not very. It did sort out the German shortage of toilet paper, I believe, as the leaflets did for us.
It's interesting because, like we said in the introduction, we have this idea of the bombing campaign, very much of the later war, but there's the tactics. I don't want to say squeamishness, but the worry about civilian casualties just was so heightened at the start, wasn't it? That the concerns were there to not use the weapons that they had to the full ability.
Well, yeah, there was the whole pre-war hype of the bomber will get through, and then there was going to be the Luftwaffe knockout blow on London, which we have the air raid warning on the 3rd of September, as soon as the war is declared, and the whole Douai-style plans for destroying cities. No one wanted to be the cause. No one wanted to fire first. It was like the naval build-up before the First World War. No one wanted to be the first one, and then the nuclear age. No one wanted to be the first one to fire. So it was that kind of ideal, and no one wanted to be the first one. It was all right for against Poland. Sorry, Alina. The Germans would happily destroy Warsaw by air, but the whole idea of bombing a French town or a British town was likewise the other way. Just too terrible. It just wasn't. During the Battle of Britain, you had to have an express order from Hitler to bomb London.
Until they got a bit lost.
Yeah, but then the RAF with night bombing had the same problem with getting lost. There was that Whitley that I was talking about in the car up, where they were coming back from a nickel raid, and they landed in the countryside because they were short of fuel, and so the whole crew gets out, and they start trying to find some villagers to ask, where are we? And they go up and they've got the map and they're talking to these villagers saying, well, where are we? And one of the crew says, I don't think they're speaking French, sir. Then they realise that the policeman that's cycling towards them is a German, and that they're on the wrong side of the border, so everyone has to flee back to the Whitley, get the engine started, whilst the policeman is calling up soldiers, and they take off to rifle fire, and I think they're about 5-10 miles short of the border.
One of the bits that comes across in your book as well is the conditions, even for the crews inside these aircraft, were pretty rough. Long distances, unheated, icing, and just freezing temperatures.
Absolutely. Again with the Whitley, I kind of concentrated on Whitleys during the nickel phase, because you get these great stories of they had on one of the flights they hadn't heard from the forward gunner, so the pilot nudged the co-pilot, said go and see how he is, and they found him unconscious in a pile of snow because it was actually snow. It was so cold it was snowing within the aircraft. They used to use the thermos of tea to try and keep the pipes warm. The rubber pipes inside warms because they get brittle and snap.
You sort of worry about flak. You worry about fighters getting frostbite. Probably isn't one of them, because I guess just coming back to you, Darren, there's not a lot in there for crew comfort, is there?
No, and just carrying on that conversation about the cold, I had the pleasure of meeting a gentleman who was 100, Hampden pilot, down at Littlehampton. Again, my head is so bad, I can't remember names at the moment. It'll pop to me in a minute. Yeah, he ended up wing commander. The story was I was going down to giving a talk to the Aircrew Association for his 100th birthday on the Hampden, because that's what he was flying. I think he did 62 ops on the Hampdens.
Wow.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, to every major German city in a Hampden, he was telling me. But initially they said, we've got this gentleman coming from the RAF Museum. He wants to chat to you about Hampdens. I don't go out on evenings, blah, blah, blah. All the users, about 10 minutes later, said, I'll give him 10 minutes. So anyway, they arranged, we did meet up on the evening before my talk. 2 hours later, yeah. We couldn't shut him up. We said, look, come on, you've got to get back to bed. We've got a big day tomorrow with the talk at lunchtime and stuff like that. So, yeah. There was one interesting part, because I asked him the question, how cold was it in the Hampden? And he said, yeah, we used to come back from these raids and we were rigid, really rigid. He said, even in the summer, you could hit the wrong type of cloud or whatever and you'd be rigid. So the ground crew were dragging us out. Then his next sentence was, "Oh, did you know we used to get a food bag? Well, yeah, we knew you were supplied with food, yes, so we used to get these lovely pies." So do you know what we used to do? We used to give them to the navigator, and he would hang him in his back on the end of the air conditioning pipe, or the heating pipe. So I said, "Well, so you were freezing cold in the cockpit, but you wanted to have a warm pipe. I said, why didn't you have a cold pipe and let the heat come back to you?" "Oh, no, we had to have warm pipes." So he would rather freeze and have a warm pipe than the other way around. So yeah, it just sort of come back to my mind. Yeah, Max Mayer. I knew the name would come back to me.
That's brilliant. We're going to do some boaty bit now, because one of the main ops early in the war for the Hampden was gardening, and that's not me getting nagged by my wife to do the weeding. It was something rather specific, wasn't it, Chris?
Yeah, the Admiralty came up with this great magnetic mine that could be dropped by aircraft, which the RAF took away and tinkered and made it better. And so originally it was going to fall to Coastal Command. Bomber Command didn't want anything to do with gardening missions because they were reserving the planes for other duties. But Coastal Command, 2 aircraft, one of them, the Beaufort, they didn't have enough numbers, and the other ones whose name I suddenly can't remember wasn't going to be ready, and then didn't have the range. And the Admiralty were very, very keen on having magnetic mines dropped around Kiel and to block the canal and the naval base. They didn't, again, coming back to not wanting to upset the civilians, they didn't want to put them around the Dutch and Belgian coast where they could hit civilian ships. And the Hampden had the perfect range to get out to Kiel and get back again. So
on these sort of operations, there are a few names that we would recognise. One in particular.
Yeah, Guy Gibson used to fly gardening raids and shot down his Hampden shot down a Dornier off Cherbourg one evening. Coming back, it was caught up in a searchlight, so they turned to follow it. And they said they must have been, I remember him saying something along those lines of, these guys must have been going back for breakfast or something, because it was they had all their cockpits lit up and were itching to get back to the airfield, and they didn't even notice the Hampden creeping up behind them, and gave them both barrels.
How effective were the gardening raids?
I believe they worked out that 120 ships were sunk by all types of mine from 1940 to 1941, and they think 86 of them were by gardening dropped mines.
Which is quite something. Darren?
When the Hampden sort of first come back into the public notice, it was through an article in Flypast, and then I was getting contacts from people, and I had this gentleman come to meet me, and he flew 30 ops on Hampdens with the same crew, but he was doing a lot in Brest Harbour, and he limped Hampdens back to Exeter and doing the gardening tasks out there. And interestingly, he did 30 ops with the same crew. I think they ended up with one broken finger between 4 of them.
Wow.
Yeah. And the obvious question is why? And he said, I don't know, guardian angel.
That's a lucky crew.
Yeah, very lucky crew. I've got photographs of. We've actually got the mirror in the museum collection from Hampden. He parked, as he called it, in Little Driftfield as he was coming into the airfield there, running out of fuel, coming back for an operation. And then he had a little book, a naughty book, which he shouldn't have had, which was explaining all his ops, which actually meant great reading. But there was like this drawings of these houses, outhouses, Hampden with a bent tail boom on it, undercarriage here, undercarriage there.
That's enough about Hampdens, because just behind us, if I squidge round in my seat, we have what is frankly a work of art, because we have a Wellington Mark 10 with its skin off, so we can see the absolutely stunning Barnes-Wallis geodesic design. Barnes-Wallis went to school just down the road from where I live, so that's always nice. But the Wellington is sort of the first of the new breed of bombers that enters Bomber Command service, and then amazingly continues all the way through the war on various marks. So the Mark 10 we've got behind us, that Darren's going to tell us about in a minute, is a late model one. But just to describe to you, well, I'm just going to say it's absolutely stunning. There's turret at the front, turret at the back, cockpit towards the front, wing slightly forward of the centre, and then everywhere you look is just this absolutely gorgeous diamond design structure. And then when you stick your head in it, it's very spacious when you consider it was from the same specification as the Hampden, which, like I was saying, is as wide as my belt, to something which you could consider the one of the first modern British bombers.
Certainly can, yeah. I remember the name, it was Peter McDermott, so we'll get back onto the Wellingtons now. I knew it would come to me in the end, yeah. And what's the width on the Wellington fuse? I was just looking at it from here. 8 feet maybe, so significantly wider than the Hampden. And the one advantage, one of the main advantages
So
of
three of my belts.
3 of your belts, yeah, all 3 of our belts together. There you go. Yeah, one of the advantages of the Wellington was the wing spar area. Mm-hmm. If you've ever been inside the bigger bombers, and the Hampden would have been the same. You had a big lump of metal between you, forward cockpit, and the rear cockpit that you'd have to clamber over. Hampden, it was almost just like jumping over a garden gate. It was just literally that narrow, just a couple of finger seals joined together, top and bottom. So yeah, just like hopping over a garden gate. Probably not that more difficult. Other things, obviously, with the the Wellington, it's fabric covered. So that's one thing we're looking at doing shortly here at Cosford in our paint shop. Hopefully throughout this winter, and not sure. We'll be asked how long the process is going to take, and I've sort of shrugged my shoulders and said 2 months, 2 years. Don't know. We don't know until we get going, but it would be a nice operation for us to start at some point. And the good thing is, saying we were talking about the Hampden, there's 10 bullet holes on one side and there's one exit, so you've got 9 pinging around inside. The thing with the Wellington, with it being fabric covered, if you were being shot at, straight through the other fabric the other side. So from an aircraft crew, the aircrew used to say they liked it for that. Plus it could take horrendous damage on it compared to I think things like the other bombers would just take. And it's all based around, as you mentioned, the diamond. If you have a little look, there's a small diamond. If that diamond gets damaged, there's a slightly bigger one. If that one gets damaged, there's a slightly bigger one. There comes a point when, yes, it is not going to be able to survive anymore, but there's some brilliant photos out there of Wellingtons limping back with half of the back end not even there.
It really is a remarkable design, and of course Wallace tried to continue that geodesic design on his 4-engine bomber, which never saw the light of the day, wasn't it? Or it did see the light of day, it didn't enter much service, but we're not going to talk about that. So what's the story of your aircraft here?
This is a T10, as we mentioned, so that's the Bristol Hercules engine. Later variant, it was a 1944 aeroplane built at Squires Gate in Blackpool, and the reason she's in such good condition is 44 aeroplane, possibly went on 1 or 2 operations, but she was a training aeroplane, hence why she's still here. Never really had time to get out there over Germany and shot down. What else do we know about her? She was the last ever flying Wellington, and the Wellington numbers, it's 11,500 round about that manufactured. There's this one, which is the complete one, and the only other one of any significant size is the lovely one that came out of Loch Ness, which is now on display at Brooklands. So again, incredibly rare object.
So vital statistics: 2 engines, how many crew?
That varied, and again, it depends if you. I'm not too sure. So you're always going to have your pilot, you're always going to have your bomb aimer, you're going to have your wireless operator, you're going to have 3. Depends on how many gun positions. This has got front and rear, so there's another 2. Some of them also had gun positions on the side, so you maybe have another 1 or 2 others in the crew. And then, of course, this within a trainer, would you count the instructor possibly on board and the trainees? So this at times could probably have been carrying as many as 10.
Which is more than you would think, generally. But okay, and bomb load?
Not so short, actually, on the bomb load. It's something I ought to know, but it is more than the Hampden. I think it's more up around about 3 tons.
We look at the author, who's looking as confused as the rest of us, so we're going to leave that. But we're going to move swiftly on from that. Your particular aircraft, you sort of said she's last of 2. How did she end up here?
There's photographs of her at the Royal Aeronautical Society garden party, I think, and that was in the 60s, something like that. And after that, she was decommissioned, and then eventually ended over at the given over to the museum. But she was on public display down at Hampden. And the problem you've got when you come to looking after these objects. Hampden, keep going back to Hampden, but Hampden Spitfires, these sort of things, fairly easy to look after inside a hangar. They're metal, they like the dry, they like the warm. Wellington has got this fabric covering, which is a natural product, Irish linen. So ideally, that wants a little bit of moisture. But you can't spray them with moisture because the metals don't like it. So she was inside a building in Hampden, being kept dry for the metal. Very, very little corrosion on it. We found odds and sods here and there, but very, nothing more than sort of surface finish. So yeah, what was happening down there was the fabric was drying out, and it became almost like the Lysander we got. So it was the same reason for the Lysander coming here as well. We got next to us, the fabric was drying out, and it was that paper thin. You could just literally put your finger through it. So the decision was made: take her off display. She doesn't look good. Let's get her up to Cosford. I say we are the facility for the museum, and this is where we do all this sort of work. Lysander, as you can see, she's being recovered now. Beautiful. Because
the last thing you want is a little excited person getting under the rope and, and putting their fist through it.
Yeah, but the Lysander we're talking about here. Hopefully the Wellington will look like that in a few years' time. The Lysander, she's beautiful, and again, she's been here. I think she come up in early 2018, maybe late 2017. And I would suggest the main thing we've done to her, apart from the fabric work and obviously the respray, is just giving her a real good clean. Mm-hmm. We've repaired a little bit of damage, some of the structure inside the wing, but and when I say clean, that doesn't mean clean and then repaint all the cockpit out. No, all the footmarks and where the crews were getting in and ring scuffs on throttles or whatever, and that's all left there. We left it. So yeah, just removing all the museum dust and grime that gets into an object. Very much like your home, when you pull the TV out, you give it. It's like the same with these things. Even though we clean them regularly, when you start taking your seats out, you suddenly start finding for us. So yeah, just giving it a really, really, really good clean. We have a historic photograph of this one. My understanding is she's the only one with special ops history, even though there are a few flying around in black colours. I think this one was the only one that was actually on it. And she's actually got the ladder on the side, and she's actually got the long-range tank on underneath, which interestingly are not on our aeroplane. So we've actually got a ladder. My metalworker's made a ladder. He's also making the framework for attaching the tank. One of my technicians has made us the tank. So that's the stage we're at now, is putting sort of looking at getting those last couple of things fitted before she goes back to Hampden. Hence why we've got her suspended. The wings are off. She's still on her wheels, but we are holding her up on a gantry from above just to help to take the weight, because to actually fit the fuel tank structure, you have to remove some of the bolts that's in the undercarriage system. So we're making sure we got full weight taken.
I do love her, Lizzie, and you've done a beautiful job. We're going to have to do a full episode just on those arcs. But
I might give you a sneaky on the Lysander then when she goes on display.
You can.
It's going to be very, very interesting, because I say we've got this historic photograph. But on the historic photograph, and I can't remember if we got it from the port side, but we got it from the starboard right side. On the engine cooling gills, the mechanical cooling gills that the pilots cannot open up, where the black, and actually I think on the other side it's grey, not green, where the gills overlap, there's one with both paints on, and she's one lower. She's actually in the black one, and the black one's up where the other one should be. Yeah. That's a historic photo, so she's going to end up like that.
Fantastic.
So everybody will look at it and go, they've assembled it wrong, but I can go, ta-da, it's actually historically correct. So yeah, it'd be quite interesting to see. We haven't swapped them over just yet. We had them painted. I've asked them to do it. I don't think they've done it. I can't see it from where I'm sat. But so yeah, when she goes down, it'd be interesting to see people giving it. They've assembled it wrong, but no, we can prove we're not. We're actually right.
There's going to be some people on some forums going absolutely mental. So that little aside allowed Chris to have a quick rummage in his book. So what is the bomb mode of Wellington?
The early models was £4,500, but then I was...
That's 2 ton, ish, just over 2 ton.
Well done.
Thanks.
Damn, I said 3, damn. That was the later ones.
Yes. Yeah, it did the next, because I was trying to skim read it, because I was really worried you were going to go, have you found, and it said later models...
I wouldn't do that to you.
Later models, they reckon they did something to double it. I've been doing too much naval history over the last few years, and a lot of my plane stuff's fallen out the back.
You bring him up on a nice day out to Cosford, and all you can think about is boats.
Well, we could take him down there and let him see the range safety launch and leave him there alone while we look around the real exhibits.
Yes. Yeah, he can go look at the boat. We'll go back to the flying pencil that's beautifully set over there, beautifully for what's left of it. But anyways, let's go slightly boaty here, because when we're talking Wellingtons, especially early war, there's one specific battle that sort of stands out among all of them. And as I can't pronounce it, I'm going to ask you to tell me what that battle was, Chris.
Everyone gets hung up on the one day, but there's actually 3 or 4 battles of Helgoland Bight, because, as I said earlier, the German fleet is a perfect target because it is completely military. Even if you accidentally kill some dock workers with a mist bomb on the port, you can still argue to the news, well, actually we were targeting the German fleet. And the bite is well within range, and there was the belief that Wellingtons could fly en masse. The early marks had not only the tail gun, but you had a turret and also a bucket gun that dropped out the bottom of the hull. So you could present a lot of guns towards any fighters coming from behind. So Bomber Command believed that if they sent out a large enough formation, they could fly over the target, drop the bombs, fight off any fighters, and still get back. Unfortunately, it didn't work.
So let's sort of talk about that operation, because it burned into a lot of people's memories and certainly had an effect on future operations, because it was, I don't want to say it's the first time the bomber didn't get through, but it was a realization of just what a coordinated defense against a target would do to a bomber formation.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, for Bomber Command, the belief that if the Wellingtons couldn't get through, there was no way that Hampdens were going to get through. The Blenheims had already proved they couldn't get through in the first operations of the war when they attacked the German fleet. And the Whitley was just not going to happen. But they believed that the Wellington was strong enough and with its design could take enough damage that it would be able to get the crews through. The problem was, well, they tried to blame the bomber commander, I think it was Kellett, Wing Commander Kellett was leading this formation of four. There were 4 squadrons worth, and because the formation broke up over the bite due to I think Kellett's formation flew over the target perfectly and then head off, and the others were trying to keep up. And instead of being in a diamond, one of them was they were followed one behind the other. But they were also because it was the home of the German fleet, or one of the homes of the German fleet. It had amazing flak defence. It's one of the few places in Germany that had radar. They actually saw them coming. Well, the Navy saw them coming. They patched it over to the Luftwaffe, who refused to believe that the British were coming, until they flew over the target, looped round, and came back. Because most of the German fighter force were in the east, in Poland. The only 2 places that had a dedicated fighter defence force was Bite and the Ruhr. So it was the only place to have its own proper fighter squadrons. And so after they flew over the target, 109s and 110s attacked them en masse and broke up the formations.
I have a rather facetious question which says, how did the operation go? As we're talking about it in these sorts of terms, I guess people can realise, let's start with the Bomber Command view. Was any damage done? Because there were some ships whose names we know in port at the time, weren't there?
Yeah, I believe Scharnhorst and Gneisenau were. I think there was also, I think there were 2 training ships sunk, but that might have been another day. But none of them were damaged at all in the bombing. I don't think the bombs was powerful enough to do the damage to the armoured decks of the battle cruisers anyway. Battleships, battle cruisers, depending on what you think of them. Not going into that.
Battle cruisers. That's my take on it.
But they weren't powerful enough to hit anyway, to damage them anyway. And then the flak defences were enough to put them off their aim as well. But as I said, Bomber Command tried to blame bomber pilots for either not lowering the bucket guns to present more fire, or that they weren't flying in formation properly. Because clearly it wasn't a problem with the plan. The plan was perfect, it's that the pilots didn't execute it properly. And unfortunately those were the poor sods that didn't come back.
Probably going to put you on the spot here, but over the course of those 3 raids, what sort of losses were we talking?
The last one was the worst one. I can't remember how many off the top of my head, but at least one formation was completely decimated. Problem was they didn't have the self-sealing fuel tanks in the wings either. So a few stray bullets here or there, and the whole thing goes up in flames. One of the planes dropped altitude. I think this one actually got away. It dropped altitude because the co-pilot's parachute strap got caught on one of the controls, and so they dropped altitude. And the Germans thought it was crashing, so they ignored it. They did shoot down a couple of 109s that got too close, but on the whole, they just took them apart. With the Messerschmitt 110 being able to fire 4 machine guns and 2 cannon into them, and it was just ripping them apart. Even the turrets weren't enough to put them off for long.
It's one of those raids, especially early on. There's plenty in your book that you think we should probably think about more, but these ones were a sort of massive wake-up call to Bomber Command that sort of took a little while to sink in. But what were the lessons learned coming out of it?
Daylight raids over Germany were not a good idea. That even the bomber couldn't get through. Like I said, if the Wellington can't get through in large numbers and are being decimated by what was there, then there's no way any of the others could. So that nighttime would be the best defence, which they'd found in the Nichols anyway, because there were German fighter defence was really just 109s would take off, fly around, see if they could find anything in the dark. Didn't really get anything. Although Helgoland Bight did provide something good for the Germans, because it was the same news day that they'd had to break to the neutral press that Graf Spee had been scuttled off Montevideo. And as the press went out, an Air Force officer came running in, and suddenly the propaganda ministry came in, no, come back, come back, come back. And everyone came in, it's like, we've just decimated a Wellington raid, this is how many we've shot down, for now this is how many our losses were. And for them, it was the good news they needed for the neutral press that day. So it did, for their propaganda value, it was really worthwhile.
It's a little bit of shine off Harwood's victory then.
Yeah.
Darren.
Yep.
Operations of the Wellington, you've got this stunning example here. I'm putting you on the spot here because I haven't prepared you for this question. During your time here at the museum, have you had many Wellington crews come up? Because there's very few of them left, as we were saying, that these aircraft, you know, especially the Hampden, very early war, so that just that little bit more, we've lost too many of those veterans already.
One thing we've always done here, and I say it really started with the Hampden article in the Fly Past magazine, where it sort of kicked off the interest, and then the Wellington come up here. We do open up if people have got veterans out there who flew these during the war. And that's not just flying them, we're in the factories, doing the manufacturing, and want to come and see them again. Get in contact with me, you're in. It's as simple as that. It's just when can we find a suitable time. But yeah, so I've been very, very fortunate. And I'm an engineer, I love working on these things, I've been involved with these things, but to meet the veterans. And sometimes you're meeting families who phone me up and say, hey, my uncle was killed in a Hampden Wellington in the war. What is a Hampden Wellington? So I invite them in as well, and it gives them a little bit of closure. So yeah, it's the very nice part. There's a lot of sadness as well. You have to think, even when the veterans come here, because not one of them went through the war without losing a friend or something like that. Yeah. So they've all known loads of people. There's a few little things I try to remind the families when they get here. There's a very good chance that their mood will change a little bit. They might go a little bit somber and upset, and that's because the reflection's coming back. And because typically they haven't spoken to the families about these things. Yeah, I was in the Air Force, I flew whatever, it was during the war and was based here, there, whatever. But the day-to-day stuff they don't know. Then they come in here with the veterans, and the veterans ticker tape starts going. Mm-hmm. They get next to them, and the families start learning so much. And it's amazing to be here and to meet these people. We're getting close to finishing on the Wellington now, and I'd love to finish off with a story. As I say, I've got so many in my head, and that's where most of them are. But during one of our open weeks, a gentleman come in with his family. I think there would have been his son, daughter, and their children with them as well. So there was like 3 generations, probably about 5 or 6 of them in total. And he said, yeah, I was a rear gunner on the Wellington. And he just, wow, still alive, yeah. How many operations? 35. Okay, where were you based? Mainly in North Africa. Then he turned around to his family and went, I bailed out 5 times. So that was 1 in every 7 flights. He jumped out as a rear gunner. And don't forget, they were in the turret. They had to get out and get their chute on. He was jumping into the med. He admitted that. Warm water. Not jumping into the cold water, but got rescued. But just think of that about being shot down, crashed aeroplane, so you can see it going down, possibly lost some of your crew. You get rescued, and then he put you back in another airplane, and you still go off to war. Incredible. But for him to tell his family that here, they went white, they didn't know. The interesting one as well, and then he sort of did a follow on and went, right, oh yeah, on the last time I bailed out, I thought, crikey, what's coming now? He said, we were shot up by a Messerschmitt 109, quite badly. He said, over the headset, we had this word, abracadabra. He said, if you heard that over the headset, that meant one thing, shoot on, get out. And he said, I heard the call, got out my turret, turned around, he said, literally, right behind the aeroplanes were coming down. He said there was a Messerschmitt 109, the German was eye to eye with me. He said literally about 20 metres behind me. He said the German had done what he needed to do, and that was to bring the airplane down. What happened to the crew was fate. If they survived, so be it. He said the German looked at him, gave him a salute during the airplane and flew away. And the family looked at me and said, what does that mean? I said, well, if the German had just pressed one button with your father, grandfather that close and said, he wouldn't be stood here telling that story and you wouldn't be on this planet now. And they just went white. So, it's those very, very powerful stories that we get to hear in here against these beautiful, beautiful objects. And I say, that makes my job very, very worthwhile. Interestingly, just a couple of recently, again, I'm going to be killed for saying this now because I'm going to get so much coming in. Last week, we had an email come in. There's a gentleman in the care home. Care home contacted us. He was on Lancasters and Wellingtons during the war. Can the museum do something? So we got the Lancaster at Hampden, somebody down there. I recorded a couple of minute video wishing him happy birthday and just showed him around the Wellington. Interesting. Come in Monday, had another email come in to our customer care team. Gentleman who's 100 this Sunday. His family contacted the museum. He was in Burma on Spitfires. So this morning I've been in next to our Mark 1 recording him a message. So it's a new line for me, just getting my mobile out, just standing high. Happy birthday, let me show you around the Spitfire. Just had a little chat about the Spitfire and wish him happy birthday again. So I'd do that all day long for them.
And that's, I guess, why you guys do what you do to keep these aircraft in this incredible condition. And it's really tragic that we're reaching that point now where you might not have that enjoyable job for much longer.
Yeah, meeting the veterans, but the families will still be out there, the ones that suddenly start researching history and find they've lost somebody in a Wellington, Hampden, whatever during the war, and will want to know more, so helping them. Just being able to bring them here and just saying, well, look, he was a wireless operator, that's where he would have sat, that would have been his wireless operator, this is what he would have seen, this is what he would have smelt in the war, and it helps them, gives them a little bit of closure, especially if they were lost during the war. And sometimes, you obviously just hear the sad side. A lot of them were lost. What was it, about half Bomber Command? Was it 55, 56%, something around about that were lost during the war? That's a huge number of lives lost.
It's a somber note to start wrapping things up, but I think it's appropriate for the period that we're speaking, because a lot of what would come had to have a start, and the lessons that were learned in these early years and in other aircraft than these two here needed to go in for what was to become quite a bloody battle in the night skies over Germany and occupied Europe. So we're going to end it there. I'd like to thank Chris Sams for joining me. Just to repeat that his book, which is actually very good, and I'm not just saying that because he's a mate, Flying into the Storm, RAF Bomber Command 1939 to 42, is available now. Genuinely, it is a very good read. And Darren, thank you so much for having us up to Cosford to have a look around. And to be fair, I think I'm going to sneak straight back over and have a look at the Dornier. But thank you so much.
Episode.
Maybe a quick extra, but yeah, that is quite something. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you for coming.
When our guests join us to talk about their work and their new book, the 45 minutes or so they spend with us is just a taster of all their efforts. So to this end, we have launched our very own bookshop on bookshop.org, where you can find our guests' latest and greatest books. You can support them, and you can support History Hack too. 10% of every sale via our bookshop supports the podcast and allows us to keep at it and bring you more amazing guests. You can find our bookshop at bookshop.org/shop/History Hack, or just search on bookshop.org for us under the shops bit. Thank you for your continued support, and here's to your next great book.